I'm an island girl. I was born and raised on the beautiful green island of Ireland in a small village just south of Dublin. It has one shop, one pub, and one petrol station. My parents owned the grocery store, and I started working in it when I was 6 years old. It was a shop that had a counter, and pretty much all the groceries were behind the counter. I loved meeting the locals, but what intrigued me the most was the backpackers from all over the world that came into the shop. Some could speak English, some couldn't speak any English at all. Those that didn't speak English would point at what they wanted. I would pick it out, hand it to them. They would open their wallets. I would take out their cash and give them their change. As a 6-year-old, guess what I learned from that? That if they could backpack around the world with no English, surely I could backpack around the world with only English. And with that, my dream to travel the world was born. I wanted to go traveling right out of secondary school, but you can't go far on no money. So I went to college in Dublin to study fashion design. In my last year in college, I went to New York on a working visa program for the summer. And there he was, a tall, dark, handsome New Yorker who drove the sleekest, sexiest sports car that I had ever seen. A roaring red Pontiac Firebird. I fell madly in love. I remember on a third date, Jim dropped me home, and I knew exactly where I was when this wave of comfort and strength and joy and happiness washed right through me. And I knew in that moment that Jim and I were going to spend the rest of our lives together. The summer flew by, and I returned to Ireland for my last semester. In my last semester, I won the lottery. Not the lottery that I could afford to travel around the world, but a lottery green card back to the United States. I finished my last semester and jumped on the first plane back to the man of my dreams. Life was amazing. We were living in New York. We were living the dream. Jim and I were together a year and a half when he was diagnosed with leukemia. He was fighting a brilliant fight for 3.5 years, and I was fighting right along beside him. During those 3.5 years, he went in and out of remission. Christmas Day, December 1993, we spent in his hospital room. The next day, he slipped into a coma. He was in a coma for about a week, and during that week, I stayed in the hospital, sleeping on chairs similar to what you're sitting on right now. Family came and went. I came and visited family and friends. And on one of those days, Jim's brother Mike was in his room, and I was there, and I stepped out, and I came back a little while later. And when I came back in the room, Mike said, "Hey, Jim, Catherine just walked back into the room." And with that, Jim opened his eyes wide, looked straight at me, and closed them again. Do you remember when I said that I knew that I was going to spend the rest of my life with Jim? Little did I know that he would spend the rest of his life with me, but that I would not spend the rest of my life with him. Jim died the following morning. I was devastated. I just didn't understand why he had to go before me. I was crushed, shattered. I didn't have a hole in my life. I had a bloody big crater. The emotional pain was absolutely brutal. My parents tried to encourage me to come home to Ireland for a visit, but I couldn't. I was stuck. I could only go to work and home, work and home. They came to visit. My brother would be out on the town in Ireland on a Saturday night, the wee hours of Sunday morning, and he'd call me. When he'd get back in, it'd be Saturday night. in New York, and I'd be sitting on my couch. I found myself following people down the street that looked like Jim from behind, walking faster than they were, to turn to see if it was him. I was an ex-smoker at the time. It was kind of a rite of passage when I was a teenager in Ireland to smoke. And I found myself tucking in behind a smoker, inhaling their cigarette smoke, just looking for some form of comfort. Jim's parents stayed in close contact with me, his mom especially. She saved me, inviting me to Sunday dinners, family get-togethers, holidays. She holds such a special place in my heart. I still speak with her weekly, and when I go to New York, she is one of the first people that I go to visit. Some of Jim's best friends are my best friends. Jim's brothers, sister-in-laws, nieces, and nephew are all in my life. One of his nieces was born 5 years after he passed, and she's my goddaughter. There were, of course, some serious blunders. There was the guy that I dated that kind of looked like Jim. There was the guy that I dated that kind of had some of his personality. Yeah. I was afraid this was going to happen. The blunders. Yeah, he had some of his personality. It took years for me to come out of the darkness. But when I did, guess what was waiting for me? Right in the wings was my dream to travel the world, was waiting for me to be ready. So I quit my job at Ralph Lauren, packed a backpack, put everything I owned in storage, said goodbye to family and friends, and with only one rule or plan, and that was to stay in warm climates. My first stop off was my local Greyhound bus station. I walked in that morning to get my ticket, and the ticket guy took one look at me and he said, "You are gorgeous." And I burst out into the ugliest cry you have ever seen in your entire life. I still don't know why I broke down so badly that morning, probably because some tiny part of me realized that I'd finally accepted that Jim and all our dreams were gone. I traveled the United States by bus and then took a flight to Mexico City with only one Spanish word: gracias. And I pronounced it just like that. I learned Spanish rapido. I traveled the world pretty much by bus, with some planes and trains and boats thrown in. I've been on 6 out of 7 continents. The only continent I've not been on is Antarctica. On the Galapagos Islands, I met the giant tortoise, Lonesome George, who was the last of his species and died a couple of years later at well over 100 years old. I had a connection with Lonesome George. I realized that Lonesome George moved through life like molasses, and that I had moved through life like through life. You get it. I had moved through life like molasses since Jim had passed. I felt the connection with Lonesome George like we were one. I have visited some of the top pristine beaches in the world with sand that felt like silk, captivated by the sunsets. watching the white foam roll in on the tip of the waves, all while smelling the salty ocean. I realize now that every time I sat on those beaches, I healed a tiny little bit. I spent 3 years traveling the world by myself. The highlight of my trip was in the south of Spain, where I met a tall, fair, handsome Texan who raced sports cars as a hobby. I guess I have a type. He is so unbelievably kind, thoughtful, caring, intelligent, and hilariously funny. We are married 17 years, and for our wedding vows, we said, "Until death do us part." And I looked deep into his blue eyes, and my inside voice said, "But you cannot go before me."